Hi, I'm Selena with Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with J.F. Dubeau, who is a science fiction or speculative fiction author who does horror also, and a lot of young adults love his books too. Um, he is a Canadian author too. He is in Montreal. And for readers unfamiliar with your books, JF, how would you describe what it is that you write?
I mean, from a personal standpoint, I write whatever I enjoy writing, which used to be science fiction. My debut novel was a sci-fi novel called The Life Engineered, and I had a great time with it, but I sort of immediately pivoted into a speculative horror, paranormal horror, and that's what I've been kind of sticking to recently. And I think just because of the how the horror community is and how welcoming and friendly it is, and how many friends I've made in the horror community, I have a feeling that I'm probably going to be sticking to that genre for the next little while.
Do you have a sequel coming out?
Well, actually, the I have two horror books published, the two first of a trilogy, and I have the third book of the trilogy coming out sometime next year.
No,
I'm
I meant
fin
to the Arch Android.
Oh, Arch Android, the sequel, that is something that is written. I have a preliminary manuscript for it, but unfortunately, because the plan was to have it come out after the second book in the horror trilogy. Then there was pandemic, and then there was various writer strike. There's a lot of things that kept pushing back that manuscript until my work schedule, or rather my planning for my writing kind of got bogged down, and now I don't know exactly when we'll be able to put it out, because I need to go back to the manuscript, polish it, and make sure it's worth giving to my publisher to work on.
Okay, that's the science fiction one. So,
Exactly.
so I was wondering.
And that's the problem when having, like, doing the writing as a side job, is that it's really hard to sort of manage what little time I do have for writing in and make like long multi-year plans that will pan out.
And you prefer the horror anyway.
Well, no, I do want to put ArcAndroid out. Like I said, the manuscript is essentially written. Is just going back to it and polishing it is going to take a certain amount of time. And unfortunately, I can't, because of the promises and obligations with the other books, I can't find the time to do it. But I
Okay.
will get to it. I will get to it.
So why don't you tell us about your latest book that came out?
The latest book that came out was a few years ago, actually, and is the book Song of the Sandman. It's a sequel to God in the Shed, which was my first, my debut horror novel. It's hard to give a proper synopsis of Song of the Sandman because it's a sequel, and I don't want to sort of spoil. So I'll talk about the series in general, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
perfect.
so the series in general, thematically, is sort of it's thematically about a younger generation having to deal with all the mistakes of the generations that came before them. It's the story of a small village in Quebec, in the eastern townships of Quebec, where there's this sort of ancient cosmic god that has been imprisoned there. And generation after generations have been either trying to manipulate it or get it to grant wishes, and it's always been backfiring. And they've always been sort of pushing that on the next generation after them to sort of deal with the consequences of what they've been doing. And this is the culmination of this sort of pushing down the puck, if you will, until the main characters in God in the Shed and then Song of the Sandman have to deal with this god being released and now wreaking havoc.
Okay. Now, what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
To the horror genre in general, I would say it's hard to, because I feel that the horror genre is less of an overall genre as it is sort of a tag that you can put on other genres. Like, you can have sci-fi horror, you can have paranormal horror, criminal, like a psychological horror.
Mhm.
So I feel that the motivations of what draws people to horror varies from person to person. But in the most general sense, I think it's because there's a certain freedom to explore themes in a way that you can't do when you keep things a little too friendly. Horror opens up doors to explore themes and characters in a way that's a little bit more extreme, and in that sense also allows you to explore themes that are a little more difficult to approach otherwise.
Okay. I kind of tend to think of horror as something that makes you really scared. It makes you like very.
Well, and that's the thing. Like I never really get that much of an adrenaline rush reading horror. Books aren't super scary to me because I mean they're books. They're It's really hard to get a jump scare out of a book. But I do like that they usually get into very complex themes that you won't necessarily see in a, I don't know, in a romance novel or a fantasy novel. Um, but I know other readers will read a book and like they have that level of immersion that I think I'm lacking, where they do get the thrills and the scares.
Well, you're really more scared for the characters.
That's
Yeah,
that's the thing.
that's
Like the
yeah,
the way I try to build tension is by creating characters that my readers will care about and then dragging those characters through hell.
right, exactly. Exactly. So what was the inspiration for the series?
That's a complicated one because I initially wanted to I had this idea of kind of mixing two genres. I wanted to write, what if, say, Harry Potter was written by H.P. Lovecraft? And but I very quickly kind of moved away from a lot of the more fantasy themes of it and just kept more and more of the H.P. Lovecraft. So I wanted to have this cast of character that was very close to each other and really bounce off of each other very well, have a very cool dynamic so that I could create this kind of this attachment from the reader. And but then I kept the cosmic horror portion from H.P. Lovecraft.
Okay. And but what really was the actual inspiration for this particular story?
It- I'm not sure what you mean by inspiration, though.
What gave you the idea for this particular um, this monster and this situation?
Well, I spent a lot of time in the Eastern Township of Quebec. That's where my parents are from. And one of the things about Quebec in general is I feel we don't have a lot of created mythology. Like we have a lot of folklore that we go back to, but like for especially from Native Americans. There's a couple of stories, old tales, if you will, and folklore, but we don't do a lot of creating our own supernatural stories. And I kind of want to inject my own thing. And one thing that's fun about the Eastern Townships in Quebec is that it's a very bilingual area. It's very like it can range from being very urban to extremely rural. So it gave me a lot of places to play and sort of create my own little cosmic horror, put it in a setting that's familiar to me, and then have this sort of generational warfare.
Mm, okay. And your book is also in French, isn't it?
Yes, those two first books got translated into French by Bragelonne, which is a an imprint of Hachette. It's funny because I wrote the books in English as a French Canadian. It got published in the United States in English, then translated in France by Bragelonne, and then published in French by Bragelonne back in Quebec. So it's a little disappointing that it didn't get translated in French in my own country, but I mean. I'm
Mm.
just glad it's getting read.
It's interesting. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So did you have to do any kind of research at all for this book, for this series?
Um, I had to do a lot. Like it's one of those questions like I didn't have to sit down and research one single topic in extreme depth as much as many little topics that I had to pick up sufficiently to understand and insert the texture of that topic into the story. A good example is just the geography of the Eastern Townships. Even though I go there frequently, being able to sort of understand, okay, what are the industries that are there? What industries can I connect to the small town that I'm writing for? in Song of the Sandman. A lot of story also happens in Montreal. I live in Montreal, so I have a good feeling about it, but I still wanted to go, I still went to visit certain places that I had walked by and wanted to insert in the story, but really want to spend time there to understand and really be able to best describe how these places, even if it's just like the crossing of a bridge, and just really bask into it. So it's not like say Andy Weir's The Martian, where he had to sit down and study orbital dynamics to really well explain how that functions in his story, as much as just being able to explain to familiarize myself with those small pieces that I wanted to be true to in the story. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Now, when you're writing your story, are you a pantser or an outliner?
I'm an outliner. I I write my stories in sort of bursts where I will, for 2 months or so, constantly write every day. And being a plotter allows me to sit down and know exactly what I'm going to be working on instead of spending time having to figure out, okay, what will be my next scene? What can I do? And also, being a plotter allows me that if I sit down and I'm in the mood to write a specific scene about a specific character, I can go down my plot like a catalog, pick a scene that fits my mood, and write that scene instead of having to go about it chronologically.
Okay. And when, excuse me. So, what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out the Song of the Sandman?
Song of the Sandman was the first time I wrote a sequel. So one of the biggest challenges was making sure that I kept a lot of the same themes, but also the same atmosphere and the same voice as the first book. And that was especially challenging because of the distance between when I wrote the first book and when I wrote the second book. There was a 5 year hiatus between the two. Because I wrote God in the Shed before I wrote my first sci-fi novel, even though the sci-fi novel got published first. So there was this massive gap between the two, and I'm still, especially at the time, still an amateur writer. I'm still starting in the field. So like I don't have a dozen novels like in my portfolio. So being able to stay true to the character, stay true to the atmosphere and the voice I had developed at that point as a writer. That was the main challenge when writing the sequel.
Okay. When you're creating your characters, um, do you, oh, excuse me. Excuse
You good?
me. Um, which character did you love or hate the most?
Of the characters I wrote,
Hmm.
the character I hate the most, especially in Gone the Shed, is um, the character of Francis, whose name earlier in the book is Chris, before his true identity is revealed. But I hate him because he is very much designed to be a hateable character. He's very smug, very emotionally detached. But the characters I love the most would be the main characters, like the kids in general. Venus, Penny, Daniel, and Abraham are the four main kids, and they have a very interesting dynamic that I made a lot of effort to not have be as like the cliche high school kids where you have the nerd and you have the preppy and you have the jock and all that. I wanted them to feel more real. And the dynamic that I usually see in say young adult novels, or that I see on television, like in teen comedies and all that. I've never witnessed that and never heard of anyone witnessing that. Like like I mentioned, the nerd jock prep dynamic. It's a caricature that I don't feel exists in real life. Or if it does, it's not as common as media makes us feel it is. So sitting down and developing these four characters to make them unique, standing out on their own, but also not falling into these cliches, made them so much more interesting than I thought they would be at first. I didn't think writing teenagers would be interesting for me. I thought it would be a drag at first, but eventually working with them, and especially like having test readers go through and give me comments, I really fell in love with their dynamic.
Hmm. Did you base any of your characters on real people, or were they totally in your head?
I don't think there's anything, I don't think it's possible to be totally in my head, but I couldn't pinpoint and say like this character is based on this person I know. More in the sense that this character has this one trait that I picked up from this person, but they also have this other trait that I picked up from another person. And now I have these two traits in this one character, and these traits conflict to create this third trait. So it's very much an amalgam of people I know remixed and resequenced into like new entities. And that's another thing that makes it interesting to create these characters, is seeing where those new personalities go.
Did you have the plot of the story? You had the plot of the story written before you created the characters, or did they kind of come together?
My plotting structure, the way I plot a novel is usually that I have a story and I have not necessarily characters, but character arcs. Basically an evolution I want to see for certain characters. And the process of plotting is me putting this plot and these character arcs in conflict with one another to see what results. It's obviously it's more complicated than that, but it's really about laying down, okay, my characters need to go from point A to point B to point C in their character arc, in their evolution. How does that interact with the plot I want them to live through? So I would say they don't necessarily come I don't come up with the plot and the characters at the same time, but I do it in parallel until I bring them together.
Does it ever change? I mean, did the characters ever kind of do things that make you change the plot a little bit?
Yes and no. Sometimes I will have like I'll be writing and I'll have the characters do something that I didn't anticipate I would be having them do. And this brings up a situation where I have to sit down and look at the plot, look at the characters, and think, okay, did I do this just because it was fun to write, but is not true to the character, or did I do this because it is true to the character and I should explore further how that impacts the plot?
Hmm.
And it's never an easy answer whether it's one or the other. It's
Ah.
if I'm not being true to the character, that means I need to go back and make sure like where did I diverge? Where did I go wrong? And if I am being true to the character, but it influences the plot in a different way, then I need to sit down and say, okay, well, how do I make sure I'm still writing the same story?
And when you're writing, do you write the first draft first and then go back and edit it, or do you edit it along the way?
Oh no, I just vomit the entire thing as
Good.
soon as
Yeah.
possible. The idea, I come from a graphic design background, so a lot of what we're being taught is to sketch first. Do do a sketch, refine your sketch, refine your sketch, refine your sketch until eventually you have something that's as close as possible to an end product, and then you polish that. And that's the approach I take to writing. And the first draft is very much that first sketch. There's also, when writing a first draft, I think it's necessary to have the freedom to make mistakes and explore. And if you're constantly editing yourself as you're going along, you're not allowing yourself that freedom and you're not exploring. So I, I feel the structure of a plot of plotting is enough to guide me. And from there on is just a free for all until I have a manuscript. As they
What's your,
say, you can't edit a blank page anyways.
what's your favorite part? Doing the first draft or or revising it?
By far, it's the first draft. Just because again, like there's that freedom of exploration. You get to know your characters, you get to know your plot better. You can see what works and doesn't, and that comes with frustrations and satisfaction. But it's not that I dislike revising. I'm revising the third book in the trilogy right now, and even though I let it sit for almost a year to sort of mature, now that I'm going back to it, I'm finding that there's certain things I hated that I love, certain things I love that I feel I should work on. So there's this discovery period in revising that's a lot of fun too.
Okay. Speaking of the trilogy, what can we expect from you in the near future?
So I've got a lot of irons in that fire.
Uh,
Recently, my I also write for a cozy horror fiction podcast called Aquillow. It's narrated by my friend Amy Frost, and it's a collaborative project. But I recently got the okay from my publisher to we greenlit a project to turn the podcast into a book. So we'll be looking at taking the first season of that podcast, re-editing it for a novel and releasing it in 2025. Then there's that third book that I'm revising right now that I'm also going to be releasing next year. So I'm editing two books at the same time. Yes, like I was saying, I've from the looks of it, I've got two books coming out in 2025. One of them being an adaptation of the podcast, and the other one being the end of this trilogy. So that's very exciting to me because it's both the end of a chapter in my writing career and the beginning of another chapter in my writing career. So it's those two things, uh, the new and the old coming together.
oh, that sounds great. Okay, now, what is your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
It's it's gonna sound so boring, but it's the writing. I started doing this as an amateur, mostly writing for myself, then writing for my friends. And it's only when my friend said, "Hey, you should try to self-publish or find a publisher for one of my projects," that I even considered publishing. The publishing is it's fun, it's interesting, but it is like it is an industry, and it's that's the job part of it that's often a little annoying. It's also having to balance great successes with great disappointments when you get a story either published or not. And I would much rather just sit down and write my dumb little horror stories at a cafe and just relax.
Now, you're a graphic artist, right?
I used to be a artist. It's not an industry I enjoyed, so I slowly pivoted to marketing instead.
Okay. Had you ever thought about doing like a graphic novel, which would be both writing and the graphic art?
When I was a teenager, I really wanted to get into comic books. Several years ago, maybe 7 years ago, I had a web comic that I did one page a week for about a year, and the demands of doing writing and illustration and coloring, then publishing on the web, this is just so much to do. And I quickly realized that the only part that I truly enjoyed about the entire process was the writing.
Oh,
And at the time, I was also starting to get published. And I realized as much as it would be great to have the time, I don't necessarily have the talent to do illustrations on that level. And I enjoy doing the writing so much more. So I would love to collaborate with someone. I have a couple of artist friends that if our schedules were to align, it would be a great project to do something together. But as far as me doing illustrations for a book, I don't think that's something I'm looking forward to.
okay. So what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome that?
Because I'm originally a French speaker. English is technically my second language, even though I started speaking English in fourth grade. I don't have a formal education in English specifically, in English creative writing. So often, I find the most challenging thing is as I'm writing, as I'm editing, as I'm working with editors, is just learning the finer points of proper grammar, proper proper spelling sometimes. And it is challenging for my ego to sometimes realize that basic things that a high school student would know and understand, I have to have my editor tell me.
Oh, I would never know that English was your second language. That is amazing.
I like to say I have two second languages and no first ones because I'm no matter how bad sometimes my English can be, my French is no better.
That's great. Oh. So what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
My favorite adventure is it sounds so low key. My first time going to a literature horror convention was I think in 2017, 2018. I went to StokerCon in South Beach. It was on the Queen Elizabeth II, which is a reportedly haunted boat. And
Wait.
I stayed at a friend's place in Burbank during the convention, and I can say with no exaggeration that I spent the weekend living as a at a wizard's place, and he took me to get a foot massage and to ride tiny trains. But the whole weekend was first of all intimidating because I had to fly all the way to LA from Montreal for just that weekend. It was my first horror convention, and I walked in with every stereotypical misconception of the horror community. Basically, oh, these are people that love monsters. There's going to be a bunch of heavy metal dudes, a bunch of recluse, and it's no one's going to talk to me, and it's going to be weird. But I need to be there. I have a horror book coming out. I need to see who these people are, and it turned out that everyone was super friendly. As it turns out, when you're reading about monsters and murder and blood and guts, you're not leaving a lot of your dirty secrets behind closed doors. So anything else that's left is kind of very honest about most horror writers and enjoyer of the horror literature. And one of the coolest things was I made a mistake reading the schedule of various panels, and I walked into the wrong panel, and I walked into a reading for horror poetry with Linda Addison doing a reading of some of her work. And I was floored, first of all, because I didn't know horror poetry was a thing, and I didn't know horror poetry could be so wonderful. And even though I could have just stood up and just went to the proper panel, I stayed all the way through. And that was kind of a revelation. So that entire weekend was a great adventure for me. But that being said, like my publishing story has given me, if there's and even though I'm not making money from the books, I've had so many unique experiences that make the entire process worthwhile. So and that is just one of them.
Hmm. Conventions are just fantastic things,
They
especially if
are.
you are a writer. You, you, there's nothing like it. You just meet so many other writers, and it's just amazing. Even if you're just a fan, you get to meet all your favorite writers. It's amazing.
It's
So,
a lot of fun just to be with like-minded people.
what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
From a technical standpoint or from a personal growth standpoint, either or.
Yeah, either or.
Greatest lesson. That's a difficult one. I think apart from a seething hatred of the LA television and film industry, uh, I would say the biggest lesson I've learned is that there is a midpoint in this career that I'm enjoying right now. And obviously, I want the career to grow. I want my readership to grow, but I know that I'm in a certain golden time, like a moment in my career that if it keeps growing is going to end. And this is the moment where I have enough readers that people will come up to me and want to talk about my books. And I don't have enough readers that I don't have time for these people. I'm in a moment where if someone wants to have a conversation about one of my characters, I can take 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes and just have that conversation. But if everything goes well, eventually that's going to be a luxury that's going to become very rare for me. If I become one of those writers that has like a line of people wanting to sign books, you can't just sit down and just chat about whatever their ideas for books are or what their impressions of your story is. And I don't think I'm gonna like that as much. It's gonna be great for my career. It's gonna allow me to write more stories and write more books and publish more things. But at the same time, I'm gonna be losing this very important facet to the publishing world. And I've learned that I'm whether it works out or not, I might as well enjoy it while I can because if everything goes well, it's gonna come to an end.
Wow, that's a really good insight you have there. That's great.
Thank you.
So, what piece of advice would you want to share with other writers?
I mean, it's funny because I was at a bar yesterday at a pub and we were talking and I have a friend who's doing the National Novel Writing Month thing for the first time and he asked me the same question, like what would be like the tip you would give? And I would say, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just write. Forget having motivation and inspiration and rely a little bit more on discipline. Like you can have inspiration when you're plotting and when you're coming up with your characters, but once you sit down to write, discipline is going to help you a lot more. Um, because again, you can't edit a blank page, you can't work on a non-manuscript, and you have to allow yourself to make mistakes. You have to get out of your own way and allow yourself to put a manuscript down. So you can't question yourself. You can't doubt yourself the whole process. Get a manuscript down. It'll give you, first of all, something to edit and work on if you still want to at the end. But also, there's a level of satisfaction that comes with finishing something of that scale that will feed you for the next project. Once you know you can write a book from start to finish, whether it's good or not, whether it needs to be edited or rewritten, you know you can do it. That's the first hurdle is being like having that awareness that this is something that's within your capabilities. And once you have that knowledge, going to the next project, the second book, the third book, the fifth book, you know you can do it and you can spend more time, you can be more comfortable going into it. So that would be my main thing. Just
Okay,
get
great.
out of your own way, get a manuscript down, get that one first success in, and after that, everything goes so much easier.
Mhm. So, are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that may have helped you in your career?
No, I'm not saying they don't exist, but I'm very much a I mean, I've done like the NaNoWriMo challenge for a while until they started endorsing AI, and now I can't abide them anymore. But
People are saying that.
I did the challenge for easily a decade, and I was, even though I was not an official municipal liaison, I was one of the only people in Montreal organizing write-ins and meetups. But I would go to these meetups. People would show up. I would write in silence in my corner, and when I was done, I'd say goodbye, pick up, and leave. I'm not a very social writer. I don't write by committee to my publisher's disappointment. So going to like clubs to compare notes and like review each other's work is not something that I do. So I don't have any recommendations. The only recommendation I would have is do look around, like go on Facebook, go on Facebook groups, look for your local people, but also look for Discord groups. I have a lot of friends who write and they love going on Discord groups, doing word sprints and being able to just feel like there's other people around them working too. That is something I do enjoy, is just not in an organized fashion.
Okay. Now, I have questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
It depends who you ask. I think one thing that most people would not realize about me who know me from my writing is that I am a massive Warhammer nerd. I paint tiny soldiers a lot. It is of the two forms of meditation. I know there's writing and there's painting little aliens and little monsters.
Ah, okay. That sounds like fun.
And it is, and the weird thing is, I can honestly say I'm an award-winning miniature
Wow.
painter. So I do it a lot, and I do it somewhat well. There are people that are leagues better than I am, but it's one of those things. It's one of those two hobbies that just don't intersect that much. And it's strange because in the Warhammer world, there is a lot of fiction being written, and one of my readers is a writer for Games Workshop who does a lot of those miniatures. So it's a very weird intersectionality, if you will.
Mm. Okay. So what are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time to do the things that you love?
Um, Way early in my career, I had someone, an acquaintance, tell me that her husband was trying to write and what tip I would give for him to have the time to write. And I said, well, divorce him. Uh, because that's the way I have time to write is that I don't have a lot else going on. Like I don't play many video games. I don't really go out with friends that much. I don't have much of a life outside of I have friends who write and I have friends who paint figurines, and that is it. It's that. So my time is very much accounted for almost to the last minute, not because I'm forcing myself into a schedule, because there's just a lot I want to get done and just so little time to do it.
Okay. So what does your writing space normally look like? I know you're I know
I
you're not there now.
I describe myself as a guerrilla writer. I can write anywhere, anytime, as long as I have earphones to block out the noise and listen to music. I can write on a tablet in the subway. I can write in a cafe. I can write at a noisy bar, at home, in my living room, in my dining room. I don't care. I know a lot of people need to have their ritual, and I'm fine with that. There's actually a very there's a specific psychology, and I have tips for people that want to have their rituals on what works best. Is that like I said, I don't have that much time to write, so I try to write whenever I can. Like I spent my lunch hour today doing edits on my work. So no, I don't have a writing space. My writing space is between my ears.
You know, what type of music do you listen to when you're writing?
That's weird because it there's no specific genre. It doesn't matter if it has lyrics or not, but sometimes like there is a song that I will usually hook on for a book for a project, and I will listen to that single one song for the entirety of the time I work on the project
Wow.
on repeat. It would probably be maddening to other people if I wasn't wearing earphones, but and again it goes back to the psychology thing that I was talking about because the one of the tricks that I use to be able to write anywhere is to have a sort of a I don't know if it's a mnemonic device, not it's not that's not the proper term for it, but basically create a psychological trigger where if I hear this song, I'm in this mental mode, and it doesn't matter where I am, I that mental mode is triggered, and I can work on what I'm working on. Hence the repetition. A similar trigger that works very really well for other people is scented candles or specific foods because memory is associated with smell very closely. So anyone that always works in the same space, I recommend like you need to have not just the same space, but make sure you have the same smell because that's going to really trigger your sense that you're supposed to be writing at that time. Um,
Mm.
so yeah,
Wow.
I don't have like playlists or anything like that. I'm a very boring writer.
Do you have any special drinks or foods that you need to have with you when you're writing? or you
Not
want
s-
to have with you?
not specifically. I do enjoy having a cup of coffee. The one thing I do have is whenever I finish a project or hit an important milestone in a project, I'll celebrate with a snifter of cognac. And that's something I did when I finished my very, very first manuscript when I was about 35. I got my 50,000 words in. It was the first time I managed to get to that milestone, and I celebrated with a glass cognac. And ever since, I've kept that tradition. And tradition is important.
Uh-huh. Okay. Now, writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work. And do you have any? And do they help or hinder you?
I do. I have two cats. One of them doesn't care, but the other one is will very frequently while I'm working climb on my shoulders to watch me work.
Your
And it,
shoulders.
yeah, she'll just lie down on my shoulders, which is great because it's fun. You have your furry companion. It is terrible because it forces you to slowly hunch over. She's not too big or too heavy, so it's not terrible, but it she can stay there for a solid 45 minutes before she gets bored.
Wow. Names.
The big one that ignores me is called Ragu. He's a big orange cat. He's as stupid as cat can be. And the small one that watches me work is a gray tabby called Mia.
Okay.
They're
Now
both
I have,
lovely in their own way.
okay. I have two more questions for you. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? Because we can get JF's work at Annie's if you
I,
call us at 508-796-5613, or you can call us at should be you can email us uh, at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com.
I
And
don't know why you would want me to plug another bookseller on your interview. I feel that Annie's is really the only place that needs mentioning. I
well,
mean,
thank you.
otherwise they're technically available at any big box, but please support your independent booksellers.
Here. Okay, my last question for you is how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
I think the best way to follow my work is it's twofold. You can usually find me, my social media is usually JF Dubeau anywhere. I'm on Instagram, on Blue Sky, on Facebook. But I don't post a lot. And the best way to support and follow my work would be to listen or and find the Aquilo podcast, which is available on any podcast platform. And even if you're ambivalent on my writing, the narration is superb. My narrator does absolutely amazing production work, and she elevates the story to an absolutely other level.
Great. Well, thank you so much, JF. That's all the questions that I have for you.
Well, thank
And
you. Thank you for having
it,
me.
it's been great. And good luck with Song of the Sandman, which is your latest book, and good luck getting your third in the trilogy done.
Thank you.